There are moments that split your life in two, before and after. For Michio Chin, that moment came on a Tuesday in November when a 6-year-old girl crashed into him on a sidewalk in Chicago and whispered 2 words that would unravel everything he thought he knew about himself. Hide me. Not help me, not please, just hide me. Like she'd already learned that asking for help was pointless, but maybe disappearing was still possible. Michio was standing outside Morty's, the kind of restaurant where you need a reservation 3 months out and a last name that means something. His driver was idling at the curb. 2 of his associates were waiting by the door, checking their phones, their faces lit by that cold blue glow. It was supposed to be a simple night. Dinner. Business. A handshake that would close a deal worth more than most people see in a lifetime. Then this kid in a pink puffer jacket, too thin for the weather, too small for the world, came running around the corner like something was chasing her. And maybe something was. She wasn't looking where she was going. Neither was he, honestly. They collided, and for just a second everything stopped. She looked up at him with these eyes that had seen too much too soon. Dark brown eyes that should have been full of wonder but were full of something else entirely. Calculation. Exhaustion. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. Hide me, she said again, quieter this time, like she was already expecting him to say no. Behind her, maybe half a block away, a man was shouting a name. Jemmy, Jemmy, get back here. His voice had that edge to it, frustration mixed with something meaner. The kind of voice that makes you flinch even when it's not directed at you. Michio should have walked away. He had a reputation to protect. He had people watching, always people watching. And getting involved with a runaway kid, that was the kind of complication that turned into headlines, investigations, problems he didn't need. But here's the thing about Michio Chin that most people didn't know, that he'd spent 15 years making sure no one would ever find out. Somewhere underneath the expensive suits and the controlled voice and the carefully managed empire, there was still a part of him that remembered what it felt like to be small and scared and desperate for someone, anyone, to just stop, to see you, to choose you. He looked down at Jemmy. She wasn't crying. That's what got him. 6 years old and not a single tear. Just this quiet, desperate hope that she was trying very hard to hide. Get in the car, he said. His driver's eyes went wide in the rearview mirror, but he didn't argue. You didn't argue with Michio Chin, not if you wanted to keep working for him. Jemmy hesitated for just a second, because even at 6, she'd learned that adults who seem nice are often the most dangerous. But then the man behind her shouted again, closer this time, and she made her choice. She climbed into the backseat like she'd done it 1,000 times before, small hands gripping the leather seat, pink jacket making a soft, rustling sound. She slid all the way to the far side, pressed herself against the window, and waited. Michio got in beside her, keeping a careful distance. Drive, he told his driver, just drive. They pulled away from the curb just as the man rounded the corner, mid-40s jeans, a jacket that had seen better days. He stopped, breathing hard, watching the car disappear into Chicago traffic. His face was a mix of relief and anger, like he couldn't decide which one to commit to. Inside the car, nobody spoke for a long time. Jemmy stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. Michio stared at his phone, pretending to read emails he wasn't actually reading. His associates were blowing up his phone with messages. Where are you? Meetings in 10. What's going on? He silenced his phone. You hungry? He asked finally, because he didn't know what else to say. Jemmy didn't answer right away. Then so quietly he almost didn't hear it. Always. That one word told him more than he wanted to know. This is the story of how a man who'd spent his whole life learning not to care met a girl who'd spent her whole life learning not to hope, and how they saved each other in the most unexpected, imperfect, irreversible way. But first, you need to understand where they both came from, because the thing about before and after is this: you can't understand the after until you know what the before cost them. 3 months earlier, Jemmy's mother died in a motel bathroom on the south side of Chicago. Overdose. The kind of ending that's tragic but not surprising to anyone who knew her. Jemmy found her. That's the part the social workers always whispered about when they thought she wasn't listening. That she was the one who called 911, that she waited by her mother's body for 17 minutes until the paramedics arrived, that she didn't cry until 3 days later when someone finally explained that unresponsive meant her mom wasn't coming back. She was 5 years old. After that, Jemmy became a case file, a number in the system, a kid with complex trauma and attachment issues and all these other phrases that basically meant, this one's going to be difficult. Her first foster home lasted 2 weeks. The family was nice enough, too nice actually, in that way where you can tell they're trying really hard to perform goodness, but don't actually know what to do with a kid who won't smile on command. They had 3 biological children, all under 8, and Jemmy made them uncomfortable. She didn't play right, didn't talk right, would wake up screaming from nightmares and then refuse to talk about them. She needs specialized care, the foster mother told the social worker, which was code for, we can't handle her. The second home was worse. The foster father drank, not constantly but enough that Jemmy learned to read the signs, the looseness in his voice, the way he'd stand too close, the specific kind of laugh that meant she should make herself invisible. She ran away after 6 days. They found her sleeping in a park bathroom. The third home was a single mother with 4 other foster kids, all older, all more streetwise than Jemmy would ever be. It was crowded and chaotic, and the woman meant well but was drowning. Jemmy learned to steal food from the kitchen at night and hide it in her pillowcase because dinner wasn't guaranteed. She learned to sleep with her back against the wall. She learned that crying was pointless and asking for things was even more pointless. She lasted a month there before the woman threw her hands up and called the agency. I can't, she said, and that was that. The fourth home was the one Jemmy ran from that November night. A couple in their 50s, no other kids, living in a neighborhood that was just nice enough to feel foreign. They had rules, so many rules, and Jemmy broke most of them without meaning to. She'd forget to ask before getting a snack. She'd hide under the bed during loud noises. She'd refuse to look them in the eye because eye contact felt like giving something away she couldn't afford to lose. 3 weeks in, she overheard them talking in the kitchen. The wife was crying. I don't think we're equipped for this, she said. She doesn't even seem to want to be here. And I know that sounds terrible, but we can't fix her. We can't fix whatever's broken. She's not broken, the husband said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. She's just, I don't know, maybe we're not the right fit. Jemmy didn't wait to hear the rest. She grabbed her pink puffer jacket, the one her mom had bought at a thrift store 2 Christmases ago, and slipped out the back door while they were still talking about all the ways she was too much. She ran for 20 minutes before she realized she had nowhere to go. No plan, no money, no one to call even if she had a phone. That's when she crashed into Mitchell Chin. Now Mitchell's story, that one's different, more complicated. The kind of complicated that comes with choices, not just circumstances. Mitchell's parents immigrated from South Korea when he was 2. They worked themselves to the bone, his father in a dry cleaning shop, his mother in a factory that made textiles for brands she could never afford to buy. They wanted the American dream for their son: education, success, stability. What they got was a kid who was smart enough to see how the system worked and angry enough to want to break it. Mitchell dropped out of college after 1 semester, not because he couldn't handle the work, but because he realized something that his professors would never admit. The real money, the real power, wasn't in playing by the rules. It was in knowing exactly which rules to break and how to make it look legitimate. He started small, logistics consulting for businesses that needed things moved quietly. Then investments in nightclubs that fronted for card games that fronted for money that needed cleaning. Then partnerships with men whose names you didn't say out loud, whose handshakes were contracts that no court would ever see. By the time Mitchell turned 30, he was wealthy, legitimately wealthy on paper, with restaurants and real estate holdings and investment portfolios. But underneath, that was a different story, one he'd gotten very good at not telling. The thing about Mitchell was that he wasn't cruel. He didn't enjoy the violence that sometimes came with his world. He just accepted it as part of the cost. He paid people well. He kept his word. He had a code, even if it wasn't one that would hold up in court. But he was alone. Deeply, profoundly alone in a way that money couldn't fix and power couldn't hide. He'd cut ties with his parents years ago. They tried to intervene to pull him back from the edge, and he'd shut them out rather than explain why their dream for him felt like a cage. He didn't have friends, not real ones, just associates, business partners, people who needed something from him or who he needed something from. He told himself that was safer, cleaner, that attachment was a weakness and distance was strength. And then a 6-year-old girl whispered, "Hide me," and suddenly all of that, the control, the distance, the carefully maintained walls started to crack. The night Jemmy climbed into his car, Mitchell drove around for 2 hours trying to figure out what to do. He couldn't just drop her at a police station. There'd be questions, attention, the kind of scrutiny his life couldn't afford. But he also couldn't keep her, could he? Around midnight, he finally pulled over at a 24-hour diner. Jemmy had fallen asleep in the backseat, her head resting against the window, her small hands curled into fists like she was ready to fight even in her dreams. Mitchell sat there, engine idling, watching her in the rearview mirror. She looked so small, so breakable, and for the first time in a very long time, Mitchell Chin, who'd built an empire on calculated risks and emotional detachment, felt something he couldn't name. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. He saw himself in her, not the specifics but the shape of it, the exhaustion, the wariness, the sense that the world was something you survived, not something you trusted. And he thought, maybe I can do this, temporarily, just until they find her somewhere better. So he made the call, contacted the police, brought her to the station himself, sat with her while she didn't talk and didn't cry and just stared at the fluorescent lights like she was somewhere else entirely. When the social worker arrived, a tired woman named Diane who looked like she'd aged 10 years for every 5 on the job, she took one look at Jemmy and sighed. "She's been through 4 placements in 3 months," Diane said. "She's been labeled high risk. Attachment disorder, they think, though she's never been formally evaluated." "What does that mean?" Mitchell asked. "It means no one wants her," Diane said bluntly. "It means she'll probably end up in a group home until she ages out of the system. It means—" She trailed off like she'd said too much. Mitchell looked at Jemmy. She was watching them talk, her face carefully blank, like she already knew what they were saying even if she couldn't hear the words. "What if I took her?" he heard himself say, "temporarily, until you find something better?" Diane blinked. "You? Why not?" "Well, for starters, you're a single man with no childcare experience, and based on the background check we'd have to run, I'm guessing your life isn't exactly conventional." Mitchell didn't argue, she wasn't wrong. "But," Diane continued, "we're desperate, and she clearly feels safe with you, which is more than I can say for her last 4 placements. So if you're serious, and I mean serious, not just feeling charitable at midnight, we can make it work. Temporarily." "Temporarily," Mitchell repeated, like saying it out loud would make it true. Diane started the paperwork. Emergency kinship placement, temporary guardianship pending full evaluation, background checks and home visits and 1,000 bureaucratic hoops he'd have to jump through. But the thing was, Mitchell was good at jumping through hoops. He'd built his entire life on knowing how to navigate systems and make things look cleaner than they were. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that temporary was about to become the biggest lie he'd ever told himself. Because you can't choose someone halfway. You can't protect someone at arm's length, and you can't teach someone to hope without learning it yourself. This is the story of what happened next. The choices, the cracks, the slow, painful process of 2 people learning that family isn't about blood or paperwork or even intention. It's about showing up, every single day, especially when, it would be easier to walk away. The paperwork took 3 hours. Michael sat in a plastic chair that was slightly too small. in a room that smelled like burnt coffee and recycling that needed to be taken out 2 weeks ago, watching Diane fill out forms in triplicate while Jemmy sat across from him, swinging her legs because they didn't quite reach the floor. She hadn't said a word since they'd arrived at the station, not to the police officer who tried to give her a stuffed bear, not to Diane when she'd asked gentle questions about where she'd been staying, who she'd been with, whether anyone had hurt her. Nothing. Just silence and those dark eyes that tracked everything, cataloging exits and threats, and the exact distance between herself and every adult in the room. Michael understood that, the constant calculation, the exhaustion of always being ready to run. "All right," Diane said finally, capping her pen with a click that seemed too loud in the quiet room. "This is temporary emergency placement. We'll need to do a home visit within 72 hours, full background check, which, Mr. Chin, I'll be honest, if there's anything in your history that's going to be a problem, now's the time to tell me." Michael kept his face neutral. "I've never been convicted of anything." "That's not what I asked." "It's the answer you're going to get." Diane held his gaze for a long moment, then sighed. "Fair enough, but understand we will be looking, and if we find something that makes you unsuitable, she goes back into the system immediately. No arguments, no appeals. Clear?" "Clear." The drive to Michael's apartment was silent except for the hum of the engine and the occasional burst of static from the radio. Jemmy sat in the backseat, pressed against the window, watching the city slide past in streaks of neon and shadow. Michael's phone buzzed, then again. His business partner, Marcus. "Where the hell are you? We lost the Morty deal. Call me." Michael silenced his phone and put it in his pocket. "You live far?" Jemmy asked suddenly, her voice so quiet he almost didn't hear it over the engine. It was the first thing she'd said in hours. "About 20 minutes, Michael said, keeping his voice even. "In Streeterville, you know where that is." She shook her head. It's near the lake, there's a park, and a lot of tall buildings." "Is it nice?" "Yeah, I guess it is." "Do you live there alone?" "Yeah." Jemmy went quiet again, processing this. Then, why? It was such a simple question, such a complicated answer. "I don't know," Michael said finally, which was maybe the most honest thing he'd said all night. "I just do." Michael's apartment was on the 42nd floor of a building that had a doorman and marble floors, and the kind of elevator that moved so smoothly you couldn't quite tell when it started or stopped. Jemmy stood very still in the lobby, taking it all in, the chandelier, the security desk, the abstract art that probably didn't mean anything. "Evening, Mr. Chin," the doorman said, then noticed Jemmy and faltered slightly. "And guest." "Evening, Russell," Michael said, not offering an explanation. When the elevator doors opened to his apartment hallway, he led her down a corridor so quiet their footsteps seemed too loud, until they reached the last door on the left. Michael's apartment was the kind of place that interior designers photographed for magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Hardwood floors that gleamed. Furniture that was expensive and uncomfortable and chosen by someone Michael had paid to make decisions so he wouldn't have to. It was beautiful and empty, and it had never felt like home. Jemmy stood in the entryway, not moving, like she was waiting for permission. "You can come in," Michael said. She took 3 steps inside, then stopped. Looked at the white couch, definitely not meant for children. Looked at the glass coffee table, definitely breakable. Looked at the kitchen with its spotless counters and appliances that had never been used for anything more complicated than reheating takeout. "Where do I sleep?" she asked. Michael realized he hadn't thought that far ahead. He had 2 bedrooms, his, and a guest room that he used for storage. The guest room currently contained 4 boxes of files he needed to shred, a broken treadmill he kept meaning to donate, and approximately nothing that would work for a 6-year-old. He said, which was not a great start. "Give me a minute." He moved the boxes, shoved the treadmill into the closet, and stood there looking at the queen-sized bed with its gray duvet. He grabbed clean sheets, still in the packaging, and made up the bed, or tried to. The fitted sheet was a nightmare. The flat sheet ended up crooked. When he came back out, Jemmy was standing exactly where he'd left her. "Okay," he said. "So, there's a bedroom, it's yours for now, and there's a bathroom down the hall, are you hungry?" Jemmy shook her head, but her eyes said otherwise. "When did you last eat?" Michael asked. She shrugged. "That's not an answer." "Lunch maybe, I don't remember." It was almost 2 in the morning. Michael opened the fridge, which contained a bottle of wine, some takeout containers that were definitely past their expiration date, and a jar of olives. The freezer had ice and expensive vodka. The pantry had protein powder and coffee beans. He was not equipped for this. "How do you feel about pizza?" he asked. "It's 2 in the morning," Jemmy pointed out. "I know a place." 20 minutes later, they ate at the kitchen island. Jemmy took small bites, careful and controlled, like she'd learned not to draw attention to how hungry she was. "This is really good pizza," Jemmy said after her third slice. "Yeah, they do good work." "Do you eat here a lot?" "No, I'm usually out work business meetings." Jemmy nodded. "What kind of business?" That was a question Michael didn't know how to answer honestly. "Different things," he said finally. "Restaurants, real estate, it's boring." They finished eating in silence. Michael cleaned up while Jemmy sat very still, watching him like she was trying to figure out the rules of this place. "You should probably get some sleep," Michael said. "Do you need pajamas or—" Jemmy looked down at her clothes, jeans and a t-shirt and the pink puffer jacket she still hadn't taken off. "I don't have anything else," she said quietly. Right, because she'd run away with nothing. "I can find you a t-shirt if you want." "A t-shirt would be good." He grabbed one of his undershirts, plain white, way too big for her but clean. Jemmy took it without comment and disappeared into the guest room. Michael stood in the hallway listening to the sounds of her moving around, water running in the bathroom, the creak of the bed, then silence. He should go to bed. He had calls to make in the morning, damage control to do, a business empire that was probably starting to wonder what had happened to him. But instead he stood there in the hallway of his empty apartment that suddenly didn't feel quite so empty. Michael didn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else in his space. Around 4 in the morning he heard Jemmy get up, heard her footsteps in the hallway, soft, hesitant, heard her stop outside his door. He held his breath, waiting. She didn't knock, didn't come in, just stood there for maybe 30 seconds, then went back to her room. Michael wondered what she'd been looking for, reassurance that he was still there, permission to ask for something, an escape route. Something about it, the quietness of it, the loneliness, made his chest hurt in a way he hadn't felt in years. Around 6 he gave up on sleep and got up, made coffee, checked his phone and found 17 missed calls and twice as many texts. He ignored all of them. At 7, Jemmy appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing his t-shirt like a dress. "Morning," Michael said. "Morning. You sleep okay?" She shrugged. "I don't really sleep okay anywhere." That honesty, that casual acknowledgement of trauma, Michael didn't know what to do with it. "You want breakfast?" he asked. "What do you have?" Michael opened the pantry again. The contents had not magically changed overnight. "I can order something, or we can go out. There's a diner a few blocks away." "Can we go out?" Jemmy asked. "I don't really like being inside all the time." "Yeah, sure, you need clothes." That became the first problem of the day. Jemmy had nothing but what she was wearing, and Michael had no idea what 6-year-old girls wore or where to buy it. He did a quick search. There was a Target about a mile away that opened at 8. "All right," he said. "Change of plans. We're going shopping first, then breakfast." Jemmy's eyes widened slightly. "Shopping?" "Yeah, you need stuff, clothes and things." "I don't have any money." "I know, I'm buying it." She looked at him like she was trying to figure out the catch. "Why?" "Because you need clothes, Jemmy, and you're staying here, so, yeah." She didn't argue, but she didn't look convinced either. Target at 8 in the morning was surprisingly crowded. Parents with screaming toddlers, elderly people walking laps for exercise. Michael felt completely out of his depth. The girls' clothing section was overwhelming. Racks and racks of colors and patterns and sizes that all seemed random. Michael stood there, holding a shirt with a cartoon character he didn't recognize, and realized he had no idea what size Jemmy wore. "Do you know your size?" he asked. Jemmy shook her head. "Okay, let's just try some things." For the next 45 minutes, Michael learned more about children's clothing than he'd ever wanted to know. Jemmy was a size 6 in most things. She liked soft fabrics and dark colors. She hated anything with ruffles. Michael threw things into the cart without looking at prices. Jeans, leggings, t-shirts, a winter coat that was actually warm, sneakers, pajamas with dinosaurs on them because Jemmy picked them up and held them for a long moment before putting them back. "Get the dinosaurs," he said. "They're kind of expensive." "I don't care, get them." Jemmy put them in the cart, careful and reverent. At checkout, the total came to just over $400. The cashier looked at the pile of little girl clothes and then at Michael, and her expression shifted. Suspicious. "This all together?" she asked. "Yeah." She rang it up in silence, and Michael could feel her judgment. He wanted to explain. "She's staying with me. It's temporary, I'm not a creep." But he didn't owe this stranger an explanation. In the parking lot, Jemmy looked up at him. "People think you're weird," she said. "Probably. Because I'm black and you're not." Michael stopped walking. "Yeah, probably that too." "Does that bother you?" Does it bother you?" Jemmy thought about it. "I don't know yet, I'll tell you later." They had breakfast at the diner, a place called Stella's that had been there since the 70s. Jemmy ordered chocolate chip pancakes. Michael ordered coffee and eggs he wouldn't finish. While they ate, Michael's phone buzzed. "Marcus again, we need to talk, now." Michael typed back, "Can't, something came up." "Marcus, what kind of something?" "Michael, personal." "Marcus, you don't have a personal life." Michael almost laughed. Fair point. He turned his phone face down and focused on Jemmy, who was eating her pancakes with the kind of focus that suggested she was afraid they might disappear. "You can have more if you want," Michael said. "I'm good." "Jemmy, you can have more." She looked at him, then at her plate, then back at him. "Okay, maybe one more order if that's okay." He flagged down the waitress and ordered another stack. "That's a lot of pancakes," Jemmy said. "You said you were hungry." "I said I wanted one more." "Then eat one and save the rest. We'll take them home." The word slipped out without him meaning it. Home, like his apartment was already her home. Jemmy didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she didn't comment. "What happens now?" Jemmy asked as Michael unlocked the car. "What do you mean?" "Like today, what do we do?" Michael realized he had absolutely no idea. He'd never taken care of a child before. "What do you usually do?" he asked. "I don't know. When I was with my mom, I just stayed out of the way. And in foster homes, there was always TV or other kids or rules. But I don't know what you do." Michael thought about his usual day. Wake up, work out, calls, meetings, more calls, deal with problems, come home late, drink, sleep. None of that worked with a 6-year-old. "Well," he said slowly, "we probably need to figure out school stuff, and Diane's going to call about the home visit. What do you like to do?" Jemmy shrugged. "I like drawing sometimes. And I like being outside, and I like when things are quiet." "Okay, we can do that." "Really?" "Yeah, why not?" For the first time since they'd met, Jemmy smiled. Just a little, just for a second. And Michael thought, maybe I can do this, just for a little while. The home visit happened 2 days later. Diane showed up at 10 in the morning with a clipboard, a tired expression, and the kind of skepticism that came from seeing too many good intentions turn into bad situations. Michael had spent the previous 48 hours trying to make his apartment look less like a bachelor pad. He'd bought groceries, real groceries. He'd set up the guest room properly. He'd even bought a stuffed animal, though Jemmy had looked at it like she didn't quite know what to do with it. "Mr. Chin," Diane said when he opened the door, "ready for the inspection." "As ready as I'll ever be." Diane walked through the apartment with thoroughness that made Michael nervous. She checked the locks on the windows, tested the smoke detectors, looked in the refrigerator and the bathroom cabinets, made notes on her clipboard that Michael couldn't see. Jemmy sat on the couch the whole time, watching silent. "Where does she sleep?" Diane asked. "Guest room down the hall." They went to look. Diane examined the bed, the closet where Michael had hung Jemmy's new clothes, the nightlight he'd bought. "This is good," Diane said, making another note. "Better than I expected, honestly." "What were you expecting?" "Most emergency placements. Let's just say you'd be surprised how many people don't bother to clear out the storage room." They went back to the living room. Diane sat down across from Jemmy. "How are you doing, sweetheart? You feeling okay here?" Jemmy nodded. "Mr. Chin treating you all right?" Another nod. "You eating enough, sleeping?" "Yes." "And you feel safe?" Jemmy looked at Michael, then back at Diane. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I feel safe." Diane made a note. "Good." She turned to Michael. "Can we talk privately?" They went into the kitchen. Diane leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Here's the situation," she said. "Background check came back clean. No criminal record, no red flags, but there are questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind where you own 3 restaurants but no one can quite figure out where all the money comes from. The kind where your name shows up in connection with some very interesting people. The kind where, and I'm just being honest here, if we had more options for Jemmy, we'd probably be having a different conversation." Michael kept his face neutral. "But you don't have more options." "No, we don't," Diane sighed. "Look, I don't know what you do, and frankly, I don't want to know. What I care about is whether that kid in there is safe and cared for, and so far she seems to be. So here's the deal, this placement continues on a provisional basis. I'll check in weekly. If anything changes, and I mean anything, you call me immediately. Clear?" "Clear." "And Mr. Chin, if I find out you're using her for cover, or if you put her in danger in any way, I will personally make sure you never get within 100 yards of a child again. Understood?" Michael met her eyes. Understood. After she left, Michael found Jemmy still on the couch, sitting very straight, hands folded in her lap. "You okay?" he asked. "Did I do good?" "What?" "With the questions, did I answer them right?" Michael's chest tightened. "Jemmy, there's no right or wrong answers. She just wanted to make sure you're okay." "But if I said the wrong thing, would I have to leave?" And there it was, the fear underneath everything, the constant awareness that safety was conditional. Michael sat down next to her, careful to leave space. "No," he said firmly, "you're not going anywhere. Not because you said the wrong thing or did the wrong thing. You're staying here until we figure out what comes next, okay?" Jemmy looked at him, searching his face for the lie. "Okay," she said finally, but she didn't sound convinced. The next challenge was school. Jemmy hadn't been enrolled anywhere since her mother died. She'd missed 3 months of first grade. Michael spent 45 minutes on hold with Crawford Elementary before getting someone who could help. "We'll need proof of residency, birth certificate, immunization records," the woman said. "What if I don't have her birth certificate?" "Then you'll need to request one from the state. That usually takes 4 to 6 weeks. She needs to start school now." After some back and forth, they worked out a temporary solution. Jemmy could start the following Monday while Michael got the paperwork sorted. When he told her, Jemmy didn't seem excited, just resigned. "Do I have to?" she asked. "Yeah, you have to." "What if the other kids are mean?" "Then you tell the teacher." "What if the teacher doesn't care?" Michael didn't have a good answer for that. "Then you tell me," he said finally, "and I'll care." Jemmy looked at him like she was trying to decide if that was true. The days developed a rhythm. Not comfortable, but a rhythm. Mornings, Michael would make breakfast, cereal and scrambled eggs. Jemmy would eat slowly, methodically, still approaching food like it might disappear. Then they'd get ready. Jemmy would pick out clothes, always the same jeans and one of 3 t-shirts. Michael would try to do her hair, which was a disaster. He'd never braided anything in his life. After the 3rd day of him fumbling, Jemmy had quietly said, "It's okay. I can just wear a ponytail." But Michael kept trying. They'd figure out how to fill the hours. Sometimes they'd go to the park by the lake. Sometimes the library, where Jemmy would disappear into the children's section and emerge with a stack of books. Sometimes they'd just stay home, and Jemmy would draw while Michael worked on his laptop. He'd stopped going to the restaurants, stopped taking meetings in person, started conducting business from his apartment, which meant people were starting to ask questions. Marcus had called 6 times. "What's going on with you, man? You've been ghost for a week." "I told you, personal stuff." "What personal stuff? You don't have a personal life." "I do now." "Is this about a woman?" Michael had almost laughed. "No." "Then what?" "I can't explain it right now, just trust me." Marcus didn't sound convinced, but he'd backed off, for now. I bet you want to know what happened next. Don't miss out, hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications. Stay tuned as we bring the next to you.